Today, in anticipation of our Acropolis Sophia session, which is entitled The Crucible and Crystal Fire Mist, we are going to enter into a deeper meditation and study upon the flame on the altar of your heart. And we are also going to discover the intimate connection between that heart flame and the allness of the Godhead. So see if you are able to travel with us in consciousness as we engage in this process. One of the disciples of beloved Ariel was being trained in Ariel's retreat, which is south of us here, a physical retreat of the masters in the mountain fastness beneath the etheric city. This gentleman who had matured in physical years was trained by Ariel, and he was remarking to beloved Godfrey about certain of the keys to his own mastery. The first thing he said is that it was necessary for him to realize that he was truly, in every possible sense of the word, the Son of God. And furthermore, when he triggered the action of God, as do the ascended masters, that the gigantic forces of nature swung into action to produce what the world would call so-called miracles. The key to all of this was in first and foremost being able to accept the pure truth of being the only begotten of one's own mighty I Am presence, and feeling this through the entire depths of one's full nature. Language, usage of terms that have been learned since childhood, certain of the mental constructs, the grooves of human thinking that are almost indelibly imprinted in the consciousness of human beings from their infancy onward. These, especially when they seek to drill into the consciousness ideas of limitation, of mortality, of humanness, if you will, of being an entity separate and apart from the deity, these have become very deeply ingrained in the outer mind and psyche, even of the most devoted students. And there will have to come for each of us more and more inner realization and acceptance of our own innate nature. In order for this to occur, it might be wise if you begin to disentangle your thinking from the use of certain terms as it relates to yourself and as it relates to your progress on the path. For example, Saint Germain has warned vociferously against the very idea of growth, as one might think of growth, where you start out in one form and through the passage of time, there is a transformation that takes place so that the end result is not what was there at the beginning. He points out that human thinking has accepted this because mankind lives during the stream of the flow of time itself. But such an attitude is actually at cross purposes to the ability to enter into the communion and the identification with one's own presence. So the idea of growing from one thing into another is very much a disservice and a crippling blind spot in consciousness. Another idea is, yes, in this sense, the idea of evolution or of evolving, that you are evolving from a lesser state of identity into a greater state. For example, evolving out of being a human being or Homo sapiens, having come through a whole series of lesser forms of life and consciousness, that you are this intermediate form of human being at this time, and at some point in the future, you will evolve out of that into becoming a divine being. Another word that is harmful in this regard is the concept even of a soul. For those who have accepted the Western religious Judeo-Christian usage of this word, more Christian than Judeo, but nevertheless there, the idea that man is minted as a soul by God, which is an entity, once again, separate and apart from the Godhead, and that this is what we start out with. We start out with our souls, and we hope someday that those souls will be grafted onto the tree of divinity. And by virtue of that future marriage, only then will the soul begin to participate in its divinity. Another term which does not allow for this is the concept of atonement, the vicarious atonement. This may be a Christian tradition where there must be a Savior such as Jesus, who acts as the indispensable intermediary, who bridges the gulf between the incapacity on the part of every life stream, and by virtue of that atonement, that vicarious atonement, the individual is, as it were, put upon the back of the Savior and carried bodily into the world of salvation. A more subtle form of this pervades even those in the East who have a misunderstood idea of the principle of an ascended master sponsor or a guru. For in those cases, the guru is looked upon almost in the same light as Christians look at beloved Jesus, in the sense that the guru provides this link that must be gone through if there is to be attainment. Here again, all of these things belie the true nature of your own heart flame. And even the word attainment, in some respects, can have a sense that somehow or another, one is going to become tomorrow something of a different species than what one is today. Now, this is a very important point, because at the root of all of these usages of words lies a sense of, if not unworthiness, at least inadequacy, that somehow or another, if one is to go to the very central point of individual selfhood, one would find there less than the Godhead. And that is the very problem with those mental constructs, that they war against your heart, which innately already cannot help but have the sense that it is one with the heart of the God presence, and indeed an extension and an expression of that very heart. So if you need to use terms, be meticulous when talking about your own advancement, and try to think in terms of the expansion of the God light from within out, so that there is quantitatively more and more and more of the greater volume of the flow of God life that is expressing through you from one day to the next. For this may indeed be the case. Not that God is limited, but the opening of consciousness is a finite opening at the present time. And the cup of that opening must be expanded so as to be a chalice for greater and greater quantities and volumes of this light. So the expansion, and also another term that can be used, is the concept of unfolding, of the budding of consciousness, which also holds within it the idea that all of the identity, all of the blueprint that is to be outpictured is perfect, complete, and there in the permanent atom of the heart, and that it simply needs to be given free rein to express itself. So we begin this greater understanding of life by understanding that your threefold flame, the heart within you, has a natural kinship and affinity with all of the life of the Godhead. There is, of necessity, a very primal sense of oneness with all of the greater expression of the Godhead. One of the techniques that we will be working on a little bit throughout this class is the technique whereby the tight little circle of individuality that you have mentally formed of your definition of selfhood, that tight little circle must be understood that it can melt and blend with the great ocean of God's life and presence. This is one of the most important keys to mastery. It has been repeated by the Ascended Masters over and over and over again. See if you can follow me in this regard. When the forces of nature are commanded, it is an action of the macrocosm, of the allness of the Godhead. When so-called miracles are produced, they are produced because the macrocosm has been engaged and the allness of the Godhead is at work. And what the Ascended Masters and the great adepts of ages have been able to do is they have been able to melt and merge and blend their own sense of themselves so that there was an entire amalgamation and commingling or at-onement with the greatness of the allness of the Godhead. This is the attunement that your heart flame is capable of making. Your heart is capable of blending with the great I am that I am, which is at the root and the foundation of all creation. And by flowing into that macrocosm bravely and boldly, you will discover that while you have loosened the hold that you have on your sense of yourself, you haven't really gone away and been erased or dissolved into that macrocosm. You do still have a focus of individuality, a sense of I-ness or I am-ness, if you will. But lo and behold, the hem of the garment of your consciousness is now all embracing. You are able to say before Abraham was, I am. You're able to have the sense that you are part of this great universal life of the Godhead. And in that allness, when in that exalted, expansive, universal embrace, from that height of attunement, when you affirm, I am light, I am the precipitation of all good, there is the nervous system of the cosmos which is activated because your consciousness has blended with that allness. At various places, Saint Germain, in describing the Ascended Masters, has described how they have felt themselves to be the oneness of all of the forces of nature. I have loved to quote the wonderful meditation of beloved Jesus, It is Finished, where he is singing his song to the God present, saying, I am alive with thee in each bush and flower and blade of grass. All nature sings in thee and me, for we are one. Unbeknownst to our outer consciousness, all the while we have our little nose to the grindstone and we have our tight little circle of consciousness that we've been so fixated upon for so many lifetimes. Unbeknownst to us, there has been this great life of God that has been going about its business in its own spheres. A great Buddhic antakarana of life, which is fueled by the fires of the heart of the central sun, coming and going, creating, worlds being born, worlds spinning out, going through all of their creation, being reabsorbed back into the unformed, to be sent forth once again. All of this magnificence is going on at inner levels at all the time. And it is simply necessary for us to re-enter that world through the open doorway of the heart, as was cited by beloved Lanello and also repeated several times before. This heart chakra is the point, the Laya center, as it is sometimes referred to, where all dimensions and worlds come together. It is the place where all planes meet and intersect. And so by entering through that heart, you come out on the other side. The difference being, and see if you can follow me in this for a little bit, the process of incarnation into the earth. Imagine, if you will, before the very first incarnation, you in the undivided sense of your mighty I Am presence, you had that electronic body, the threefold flame, the causal body. Above you, the great God flame of your twin flames. But that consciousness centered in the electronic body also had its universal Buddhic awareness that was timeless and spaceless, part of the vastness of eternity. And when incarnation took place for the first time, as has been described a fire enfolding itself, skeins of this allness of the Godhead came together in a centripetal whirlwind, descended down in what is known as the involutionary spiral. And all of that vastness of the great macrocosm collapsed upon itself and congealed as the permanent atom of the heart and descended into this three-dimensional world. So all of that magnificence is condensed, compacted within the threefold flame. It therefore has a tremendous coil of kinetic energy that has been compressed there. And it is simply a question of release and of attunement to allow that pressure to reassert itself and to once again fly amongst the gossamer veils of the Milky Way and the macrocosm. Your heart flame has that capacity within itself to enter into this communion with the great macrocosm of the allness of the Godhead. As the masters have said over and over and over again, one of the greatest challenges that they face is to bring about the acceptance in the feeling world and in the mental world of their students. This is work that each of you will have to continue to do on your own four lower bodies. Because despite all of the work and all of the faith that you might have within your heart, there are elements of your mind and of your emotions that are still incredulous, that still have a grooved pattern of skepticism or of doubt about the absolute authenticity and veracity of these things. I like to cite, I'm sure, something that was unintentional, but does point this out, even in some of the best disciples of the masters. You'll notice any number of occasions in the stories that Godfrey told of himself and of the children in their association with Saint Germain, any number of times that the things that were going on before their eyes, they just couldn't accept. It was too much, too strange. One occasion was when they first heard from beloved Virgo and Pelor, the son of even pressure. Oh, that was just too much. And in fact, Leonora said, we can't continue our examinations at this time. And they had to get a little scolding from Saint Germain about their outer minds not being able to accept it. On another occasion, they came into one of the great council chambers in the middle of one of the mountains, and it was noontime inside. There was regular old sunlight inside the heart of this mountain, and everybody was startled about how there could possibly be sunlight. Saint Germain said, you have to begin to train your consciousness not to be so hidebound in its thinking process. Why is this important? Because your feeling world, all of it, your mind, all of it, those bodies are going to have to resonate with this flow of life in the macrocosm. And if they are dragging along and only the little surface consciousness is paying lip service to the truth of the law, but deep down inside there is still this lead weight of thousands of lifetimes of skepticism, of unbelief, then of course those bodies won't be able to be the chalice through which the greater power of the God presence would be able to flow. So each one has a challenge to work on themselves and to be able to bring their vehicles of consciousness into agreement with what your hearts are telling you, so that your mind is nimble, your feelings are like quicksilver, ready to leap and fill with enthusiastic acceptance whatever proposition of the divine that the Christ self holds before the mind's eye for you to precipitate. So we are just for a few minutes going to hammer away at this original premise that your heart is none other than the heart of your own mighty I Am presence. Having your crystal cord as if it were a fishing line, and your mighty I Am presence is in the boat at the top of the water, and you are down in the astral plane, in the astral waters, and down there at the bottom of the line, there's a little hook and bait, and that's where your threefold flame is. That is not the proper appreciation of the relationship of your heart flame to the heart of your mighty I Am presence. Let me cite for you just a few quick examples of how Saint Germain has sought to drive home this point. There is no activity where the consciousness or the attention is held on the mighty I Am presence, wherein the element of love divine is not active. But this natural activity may be greatly intensified when you add your own consciousness to the quality of divine love. This is a subtle point which few who are already ascended are actually able to realize. For most say to themselves, how is it that we mortals may possibly ever intensify the activity of the Godhead? And I answer that God, the mighty I Am presence, acts through the free will of each individual according to his or her acceptance. And the individual being already an undivided part of God, being the same in quality as God, the individual has the right and the power to increase and intensify any of the natural activities of the Godhead upon which the outer consciousness is focused. You see, from the beginning of this work, way back when, Saint Germain very quickly cleared the entire chessboard of the I Am faith, of all of the old chess pieces, and began with premise number one, that you are already a part of God, that every individual on the planet is already an expression of the Godhead, so much so that the most agnostic or even atheistic individual is still possessed of the Midas touch, where their thought and feeling are creating 24 hours a day, waking or sleeping. And it is this creative power that is inherent within the very nature of individuality that has been the bane of mankind. For they have gone on doing all kinds of negativity in thought and feeling with the justification that since it was going on in the feeling world and in the mental world, it wasn't really real. Only that which is done in the physical body affects other parts of life. Whatever goes on in flights of fancy in the mind or in the emotions are merely just pretend and have no consequence whatsoever. Well, you can go outside of this room, you can go up onto the balcony, and you can look at the walls of the mountains in the distance to the north, and you will see there the tortured veins of sedimentary rock that have been laid down upon this planet for millions of years, thanks to the constant misqualification of millions and billions of life streams over untold eons of time upon this planet. This planet is today a product of an almost infinite ancient time since the fall of man, where the collective mass consciousness has been producing all of the phenomenon that we see upon this planet in the animal creation, the plant creation, and in the mineral life itself. So we are here, and that is the sum total of all of that expression which has ever gone on. So there is that creativity that goes on. And it is important to sound this message so that everyone will realize that their life and their creative use of thought and feeling are of major, major consequence to the world. Another example of this emphasis of the action of the heart was delivered long ago in a dictation by the mighty Elohim of the seventh ray, beloved Arcturus, one of the first to come to the aid of Saint Germain in this Aquarian age dispensation. Arcturus had this to say to the students many, many decades ago. Now notice, why do I call your attention to this higher activity today? Because the heart inside of your physical body represents to you your mighty I Am presence in action right here. Your heart is the anchorage and the activity of your mighty I Am presence right here within your physical form. Let us feel this very powerfully and no longer accept that any other power can act, but that the light right here from your own mighty I Am presence can act. Please take this in all of its simplicity. Going on, he says, do not limit your ability to call your presence into action with such intensity that all things are quickly dissolved which are less than perfection. The reason I'm saying this today is that many times the students say, well, I know what you're telling me, but I don't quite feel that I, myself, have the same ability as you do to call the presence into action. That is really not the case, for you do have the same ability, only you just do not think you do you see? And as long as you put it off for someone else vicariously to call your presence into action, just that much longer are you depriving yourself of the quick freedom which you would otherwise have in your own determined calls to your presence. Here he goes on to say, my joy is so very great to speak to you heart to heart, for these are oh so real, these heart-to-heart talks, because my heart is acting within yours while you are here today. Is it not a wonderful thing to realize that the heartthrob of all of our blessed hearts is actually the heart of the mighty I Am presence? The heart in you is not yours. Did you ever think about that? It is, in fact, the heart of your mighty I Am presence. You may not have realized this, but in fact it is true that all of our hearts beat in unison with one another, because we are all breathing to the same rhythm of the great central sun. That heart in you is not yours. Did you ever think about that? It is the heart of your mighty I Am presence. And yet some of you think you can have heart trouble. Is it not comical what the human will consider? In the future, I know every precious one of you will never again think of yourself, your outer self, that you do not also think that your heart is the heart of the I Am presence. This is true, absolutely true. You think your heart belongs to you, but that which gives you life belongs to the I Am presence. Now watch out. We're getting down to definite things. Once you accept that this heart is the heart of your I Am presence, the next thing are the points of light within every cell of your body, which also belong to your presence. Look out then. What is left that doesn't belong to your presence? Only the discord that has clothed those points of light. That's all that's left. And once that is swallowed up, there is only the one self, the one presence that each one is in fact. As this truth is able to strike the shackles off of the thinking of the mind, it's likened under those scales that were on the eyes of St. Paul until they were stricken from his eyes at the behest of the Christ. And so these constructs accepted for so long in our world, these constructs prevent us from being able to liberate the heart to do what it really has to do. Now, if you can, let go and fill your consciousness with the pluming radiance of your threefold flame, then there begin to be certain rewards that come your way. You remember earlier, we talked about the sense of belonging, the sense of kinship. The truth of the matter is that in addition to the threefold flame which you have, there is the macrocosmic universal aspect of the Godhead. And as you enter the sacred chamber of your own threefold flame and send forth love to the Godhead, the thing that will allow you to expand your consciousness is the realization that this other part of life in every one of the electrons in the great sea of universal life are really your own, are really part of the one God being that you are. You may begin to experiment with the figure-8 flow between yourself and this great sea of universal life. You might send out a little weak or feeble pink shaft of light in one direction, just to see if there's anything out there in the darkness. And lo and behold, there's another part of yourself that sends back a return current and says, thank you, I love you too. And getting a little bit bolder, you expand the fan shape of that love and discover that all of these points of God consciousness are able to commiserate with you, just like they were a long-lost blood brother or blood sister, because they are blood of your blood, bone of your bone, sinew of your sinew. They are of the same God stuff as yourself. And so you discover that, lo and behold, you can have an ongoing love affair with universal life. And you discover that this life is able to love you back and indeed leaps in response to every little wink of love that you send out and returns it multiplied manyfold over. And little by little you will discover that you can cause this universal light not only to reciprocate that love, but with a little encouragement, the light, the electrons can begin to dance and do their little somersaults. And before you know it, they start becoming more and more energetic and throwing off photons of light and radiation and fire to light up all around you. And then you discover more and more that all of those electrons have the amazing ability, and this is the most amazing thing of all, that this life out there is intelligent. And the first time it happens, it's like a little stone started to talk back to you. But in fact, it is that way. Remember, Jesus said, if these shall hold their peace, the very stones will cry out. The truth of the matter is that this great sea of universal life is the body of the allness of the Godhead. It is the vehicle that the allness of the Godhead expresses through. And so, if God has mind and intelligence, lo and behold, miracle of miracles, every one of these electrons has an ability to react and respond with intelligent obedience and cooperation with the heart flame of love. Furthermore, these little electrons are possessed of another very powerful force, which is the power of will, which makes for the substance of their nature. I have just rehearsed for you 3 attributes of the universal sea of life. These attributes are studied in great detail in the East, and we have taught them at Acropolis Sophia. These qualities are known as Rajas, Sattva, and Tamas. Rajas is the capacity of the sea of life to express force, to express radiation, to express light, heat, electricity, magnetism. All of the gamut of force and momentum are in this quality of Rajas, which is the pink plume of God in action. It's the action mode of this sea of life. And it responds to the pink plume of the threefold flame. As you send forth love, it is invocative of activity, of radiation on the part of this life. Furthermore, there is this mind of God that is operating through each of these electrons. As Saint Germain says, for intelligence to act, there must be intelligence to be acted upon. The intelligence that acts is the individual intelligence of your mighty presence that is within your golden plume of your threefold flame. The intelligence that is acted upon is the yellow booty, the sattva, which is the actual primal intelligence that is there within the great sea of universal life. Components of this are in evidence throughout the entire kingdom of elemental life. Elemental life, down to the tiniest little electron, has this innate intelligence within it. What it does not have is a sense of self-awareness as we understand it. I've tried to explain this from time to time, even in some of the greater developments of elemental life we have in the animal kingdom. There you have, as some of you may know, the group soul expression of elemental life, and they have intelligence, but they do not have, any one of them, an individual mighty I am presence. Therefore, they do not have a sense of self-intelligence, a sense of self. You won't ever see any of them sit down and put their hand or their paw or whatever under their chin and say, I never thought about this before, but I exist. Son of a gun, I exist. That kind of reflection, self-reflection, isn't there. But that doesn't mean that there isn't intelligence there. It doesn't have that self-will within its own individual self. But what it does have is the ability to perceive intelligently and to love and to swing into the joy of cooperation with the one, such as an individual mighty I am presence in a threefold flame that does have such self-awareness as to affirm I am. So there is that golden sattva within this great sea of universal light, so that it does respond. And it is quite a magical thing, a mystical thing, to see life congeal, come together in an involutionary centripetal spiral to flow into whatever it is that the children of God are envisioning. As Saint Germain says, all mankind are constantly giving expression to this great sea, waking or sleeping. Then you have the last component of this, which is the will, or the tamas, which is that which, in a sense, resists further change. It is stability. It is what accounts for what we call substance. So light is intelligence, light is luminosity or radiation, and light is substance. All of these are there within the great sea of universal life. And all of them are ready to pour out the full cornucopia of the abundance of life to the Christed individual who uses the scepter of their threefold flame to ignite this sea. Moria said one time, "Oh, what thundering concepts, faith, hope, and charity." For it is the golden plume of hope that connects with the intelligence in the sea of universal life. It is the pink plume of charity that is invocative of the action going from static to kinetic action of this great sea, to where it will flow forth as the whole gamut of radiation, and even in its more sophisticated forms of power. And by that I mean various forms of potential or kinetic energy, electricity, water power, wind power, and so forth. All of these flow forth out of the rajas action of love within the great sea of universal life. Your pink plume is part and parcel to that within every one of those electrons. It is one and the same action of the pink plume in both cases, one being the active, the other the passive responsive mode of the same heart flame. The blue plume is what provides for the endurance, the timely substantiability of that which is to come forth, that allows it to remain, to be stable, to be touchable, to be formed into a physical precipitation, if that be the requirement of the hour. So there is this ongoing interaction, this figure eight reciprocal giving and receiving on both sides. Your heart giving of the outpouring of itself to this great sea, and your heart receiving back the outpouring from that great sea, coming forth as the forces of nature, coming forth as all of creation, bringing about the manifold ways in which life is to manifest. As the masters point out, and as Saint Germain has said over and over, all mankind do this haphazardly, but the adepts learn that they are able to throw out a vast lasso of their attunement, of their visualization, and to magnetize veritable limitless seas of this universal life substance, and to qualify these vast amounts and to have it begin the process of condensation and distillation of bringing back this universal life, which is so very cooperative and obedient, and bringing it into manifestation. This is part of the luxurious goodness of life that is to be found once you have the mechanism which is able to interact with this great dimension of God life that exists on so many levels. And the mechanism in all cases is the same. It is the heart, the threefold flame, the pink, blue, and gold, the immortal, victorious, threefold flame. That's why it's called many times a scepter of authority, because there are no two ways about it. This is another part of the action that should enable you to have more faith when you understand that it's not so much a matter of faith as it is the fact that this is always happening anyway, whether you've realized it or not, and you might as well take advantage of the law because the law has been working, only you've been using it haphazardly. The scepter of authority of the threefold flame, when that flame is qualified, especially through the thought and feeling world and so forth, the universal sea will respond instinctively, of necessity. Think of it this way, if you will. At present, in the little microcosm of your selfhood, your life is within the flow of your crystal cord. Your life goes throughout your physical body, your nervous system, and the flow through the nervous system of the crystal cord energies has enveloped all of your cells. When the threefold flame within your heart decides to pick up something and you tell your arm to move across the table and pick something up, the rest of this universal life responds automatically and instinctively. Hopefully you don't get an argument from your hand that says, well, I'm not sure, you better prove to me why it's important for me to do this. You don't have that kind of rebellion in your members. The hand doesn't even think about what it's doing because it is instinctive and it is responsive because your life ensouls it. Well, there doesn't have to be a sharp-edged border or boundary to your selfhood. When you go within your heart and you make this at-onement and blend your consciousness with the great I am that I am and allow your consciousness to flow out into this great sea of universal life, your individuality, your crystal cord energy, the radiation, the expansion of the circle of influence of your own threefold flame has now gone out to ensoul more vast dimensions of this life. And then all of that sea of universal life is just as responsive to your heart flame as is your hand or your foot or any other part of your physical organism. This is the attainment, the attunement that is possible to every one of the students of the light. Of course, it means that the outer self, the self that considers itself to be a personality, that considers itself to be whoever it is that's name is written on the driver's license, that owns such and such car and such property, that was born on such and such a date, of such parents and part of this tribe or that tribe, all of those finite, limited things, they are incapable of entering into the communion and the sense of oneness with that greater part of life. Now, when you give this prayer, which we've been giving to the great, great silence, whether you realize it or not, you have been led and guided through an exercise in doing this very at-onement of consciousness. And so, before we conclude, I want to just point out to you once again how this decree has been constructed. and how it has been guiding you to enter into this great, wonderful, universal sea of God's life that is ongoing in all cases. Beginning with the first paragraph, as I stand alone in your great, great silence, my Father, Mother, God, in the midst of me there blazes a pure light. So immediately your attention is turned within. And where is it turned? It is turned to the sacred presence of the immortal and victorious threefold flame, abiding on the altar of your heart. Once you are centered there in that heart, you let the flame shine. And so, first, the light shines to fill every atom of your four lower bodies with the radiance of that heart. What are you shining out? You're shining out the very perpetual breath and zither of life itself. You're shining out adoration and love. You're shining out the strength of the blue plume, the purity of the white fire core of the threefold flame, the beauty of the pink plume, the sense of perfection that is native to the entire threefold flame. And you are shining forth that God consciousness of your mighty I Am presence, which is like a king or a queen, a sense of dominion. Dominion in the threefold flame. Your mighty I Am presence is a creator. Your mighty I Am presence shares the consciousness of the God presence, the great I Am, that has created this entire sidereal universe that we see out here. All of those millions of galaxies and stars of stars, just that on the physical, plus all of that which is within. Do you not think that the God that spun all of this out of its own heart substance has a sense of God dominion over that which it has created? It most certainly does. It is beneficent, but it is royal, and it is masterful, and it is dominion. And so, since your heart is the heart of your presence, your heart can only know such a consciousness of dominion. Then, as you continue to gaze into the heart of this light, lo and behold, you are drawn upward in your attunement, up the crystal cord, until your eye and your attention is resting and riveted upon the veritable blazing sun presence of your own electronic body, a shining, starry, fiery, coruscating, blazing star in the ethers that is liquid light, and yet with all of its intensity, it has a soft, comforting radiance about it, a radiant luminosity. This electronic body is drawing in light. That's the absorbing action. It is drawing in the light of the great central sun, drawing the light of the God flame. It is absorbing it. Then it is mothering that light which it has drawn in. It is giving quality to that which it has absorbed. And having charged it with a quality in the mothering action, it sends it forth again as a gentle caress of love. The greater fire of the greater light of the God presence sent forth as a caress to bless all of life. Imagine, if you will, the weightless orb of your electronic body ensconced within the glories of the causal body, shining forth beneficently, bountifully, all of its attainment as a glad free gift to every part of life everywhere. This, your mighty I Am presence, is doing constantly. The outer consciousness is able to affirm, now I know that I am God. And here comes the best part. As God, I am one with God's whole universe. So as soon as you enter that oneness of the nucleus of the electronic body, and identify with that, since your mighty I Am presence is already at one with every other part of life, your consciousness takes on that expansion of the God presence, and you likewise become one with the whole universe. This is the At-Onement that must come about for the macrocosm to act through you. I whisper quietly to thee, thou mighty I Am presence. I am undisturbed. I am in the stillness of this great, great silence. Yet while there is all of this tranquility, all of this complete silence, still in all of that, there is a coruscating radiance that expands to include the whole vast universe. And everywhere you come to the realization that every theoretical, mathematical point in space is actually a well, an upwelling of life. God's conscious life is at every point in space. God's conscious life. This universal life is dimpling space. Everywhere there is this artesian well of life that is just bubbling up, bubbling up. It's not manifest because it's a perfect balance of the three qualities, love, wisdom, and power, or sattva, rajas, and tamas. And as long as the three are in such perfect equilibrium, they cancel each other out as far as manifestation is concerned, but they're there nonetheless. And then when you start qualifying them and you change the ratio between the three, seemingly out of nothing comes creation. But everywhere I know there is God's conscious life. Now I raise the Christ light high within me and sing thy praise, O God. In the tones of my music, inspiration hums. Louder and louder within me, the great mother sings of new life. This is the reciprocation back and forth. You are a lover of life. You are reveling in this great sea of universal life and joy and effervescence and immortality. And the music of the spheres, the humming of the loom, the shuttle of the attention, all of this is going on, and it's getting louder and clearer within your consciousness. And finally, all of this breaks to a crescendo after your consciousness has expanded and sent this forth. Then begins the great return. And all of this magnificence begins to return back to the point of center from which the impulse was sent forth. And that's when whatever the creative endeavor is that you have sent forth comes back as precipitation. It comes in from every point of space. It comes together as a contraction, a condensation, and it will produce the birth of whatever it is that is the deliverance or the salvation of that which you require. So that is the way in which all creation goes on, both by the ascended masters, by the tiniest angel, by every part of life possessed of a threefold flame. It goes on in this way. It is not by mistake. So many times in the symbology of the depiction, for example, of the qualities of love, exemplified by our own beloved Lady Master Venus, as she was known in antiquity, that she is often surrounded by symbols of abundance. You will see tiny cherubic figures that are happily going about mundane tasks. They're pouring water, they're picking flowers, they're harvesting grain, they're doing all kinds of husbandry, different kinds of things. And most often they're carrying in their little chubby shoulders a beautiful cornucopia. And out of the mouth of this cornucopia spills the abundance of nature's fruit as a bequest for life to experience. That is the consciousness that is there within this great ocean of life. Once you have plumbed the depths of it, it won't be so miraculous that Saint Germain would be able to condense some of that into a crystal cup with an elixir of life, because it is part and parcel and nature of that great sea to be such a bubbling effervescence of life. As your heart flame comes to know this ground of being that is always there in the Godhead, that goes on and on and on, and comes to take comfort in the benign love that is at the very heart of all creation, to know that the will of that Godhead is good, that its only will is to create beauty and magnificence and to give joy to every part of life and creature, you can once again revel in the various expressions of life and be yourself, if you need to be, a Pollyanna in the midst of more sophisticated, well-educated, cynical, modern, 21st century civilized people. You can afford to allow them to have their quota because you have drunk of the depths of this elixir of life yourself, and it's for you to point the way for them to find it as well. Thank you.